A comedy director who has had quite influence on the genre is Judd Apatow. His films seem to strike a chord at a particular time, and there is something appealing about the way he has approached comedy. He even helped launch the careers of actors and filmmakers who have found success of their own. Even though he did not make his feature directing debut until 2005, Apatow had made his mark on comedies long before then. Apatow started his career initially as a stand-up comedian, and then produced comedy specials for the likes of Jim Carrey and Tom Arnold. He then became a producer on The Larry Sanders Show and The Critic, and received writing credits on Heavyweights and Celtic Pride, two low-performing movies for Disney. He also co-created The Ben Stiller Show. A movie he had a hand in, which he had a lot of confidence would break out, was The Cable Guy. He was a producer on it and did a rewrite on the script. Even though he was listed as the screenwriter in the trailer, the Writers Guild decided not to give him credit. Despite that setback, Apatow expected the movie to be a hit, especially with Jim Carrey's popularity at the time, and further his film career. It did not. He did make a few uncredited polishes on a few other Carrey movies, as well as ones with Adam Sandler, but he mostly retreated to television for a while. A commonly stated misconception is that Judd Apatow created the show Freaks and Geeks. While he was an executive producer and wrote and directed a few episodes of the series, it was actually created by Paul Feig and was heavily inspired by Feig's own youth. He was certainly involved, and he even started his working relationship with several of the actors cast in the series, but I do think he gets a bit too much credit for Feig's creation. Apatow did create the short-lived sitcom Undeclared. Centering on a group of university students, it only lasted a single season and would develop a significant following after more people discovered it on DVD. Undeclared showcased Apatow's ability of working with an ensemble of actors and allowing them to find their comedic voice. This was even the show where he met Nicholas Stoller, and was where Apatow encouraged Seth Rogen to become a writer. So as short-lived as it was, it played a pivotal role in his career. There were a few other television series he tried to get off the ground, but they never went further than a pilot. When he was producing Anchorman: The Legend of Ron Burgundy, he asked Steve Carell if they could develop a film together. That became his feature directing debut, The 40-Year-Old Virgin. This movie has the sort of premise that usually results in a bunch of gross-out gags, and while it certainly has its fair share of R-rated jokes, there is a sweet element to the film with Apatow interested in making these characters feel genuine, including Carell's title character, Andy, and that helped make it stand out during that landscape of comedy movies which are often reliant on lowbrow humor to gain laughs. The title might lead one to expect that Andy will be the subject of mockery, and while there's a bit of that in there, the message of The 40-Year-Old Virgin is a positive one about respecting someone getting to the sexual level they're comfortable with. Andy's friends are even shown as being in the wrong for the advice they give him and for making fun of him, while the relationship that forms between Andy and his eventual girlfriend Trish is quite heartwarming. Judd Apatow handled that balance of comedy and sentiment with ease, and again showed his skill working with actors and giving them the freedom to craft their comedic personas in whichever way they felt fit. It proved he could handle the task of directing a feature-length film, and audiences responded to this different sort of R-rated comedy than they were accustomed to seeing at the time. His next movie, Knocked Up, is my personal favorite of the films Apatow has directed. With Seth Rogen in the lead role this time, it focused on a schlub who accidentally gets a woman pregnant after a one-night stand, and we see the comedic situations and dilemmas that come from this. Apatow mounts several hilarious scenes while exploring the uncertainty and nervousness of becoming a parent, and the relationship formed between these two people whose worlds collide. Much like he did with The 40-Year-Old Virgin, he filled the cast with a bunch of funny people who each make an impression, especially Paul Rudd and Leslie Mann as the married couple who provide a potential glimpse of where Ben and Allison could wind up in the future. With his first two features, the elements that will be present in several Apatow's movies become clear. He has a penchant for giving a comedic talent a major leading role with characters suited to that particular style and a few aspects of themselves thrown in. The third act often shifts more towards drama than comedy as the characters have a bit of a falling out, and the rest of the film has them try to resolve this as they air out their feelings and inner thoughts that have been bubbling for a while. Apatow also likes to let the actors ad-lib and come up with all sorts of alternate takes as they riff on whatever scenario the characters are in. Apatow lets the camera roll as they throw out one comedic line after another. The physical media releases of his movies will even put together montages of these ad-libs. One frequent criticism of his work that I tend to agree with is that his movies are often about 20 minutes too long. For whatever reason, Judd Apatow is incapable of directing a 90-minute comedy. His shortest film is The 40-Year-Old Virgin, which runs an hour and 56 minutes. While I do find that movie to be well-paced, you really start to feel the length of his other films at a certain point. He has defended the runtime of his movies, saying he wants viewers to really get to know the characters and that he lets scenes play out like they would in real life. Fair enough, but at a certain point, people will feel like they had their fill and want the story to wrap up. The runtime issue even somehow extends to movies he's merely a producer on. I like Superbad and think it's a funny movie, but every time I watch it and it gets to the final party scene, that's when I start to tap out. Funny People was an interesting movie that was an example of Apatow's strengths as well as his weaknesses. I do like the film as a whole, which features one of my favorite Adam Sandler performances. It's a well-done and often funny contrast between a young aspiring comedian and the disgruntled and tired comic actor he looks up to and befriends. However, looking at the runtime, you may notice it's somehow longer than 2001: A Space Odyssey. Not exactly what you would expect from a movie with this premise, and there's a reason why. Around the 80-minute mark, it seems like the story is wrapping up and the character arcs are reaching their end, but there's still over an hour left. It then becomes a different movie entirely about Sandler's character trying to get back together with his old flame. These are actually really good scenes with a particularly fun performance from Eric Bana, but it makes Funny People seem like two movies smashed together. Apatow's tendency to want to spend as much time with his characters as possible results in films like Funny People outstaying their welcome. The length problem is also an issue with This Is 40, although my criticism with that film is that I just don't care about the characters' problems. As I mentioned before, I liked Rudd and Mann in Knocked Up, so an entire film where we follow their characters around should be a fun one, right? Instead, we get a movie about their financial difficulties, which could be interesting, but it mostly meanders along with the various subplots. It has its funny moments here and there, while also showing the downside of Apatow letting his actors ad-lib for an absurd amount of time while the camera rolls. At 2 hours and 13 minutes, This Is 40 was another movie that did not need to be as long as it is. Apatow has not directed as many movies since then, although he's still been busy producing. A lot of the traditional sorts of comedies Apatow has been associated with have now moved to streaming, with Hollywood studios being less likely to put them in theaters. However, he has used his clout to help give some of them theatrical releases, which is good. Additionally, he's continued to be a big supporter of up-and-coming talent, including inspiring Kumail Nanjiani and Emily V. Gordon to write the script for The Big Sick, which he wound up producing and is one of my favorite romantic comedies of the past several years. Apatow would direct Trainwreck, a vehicle for Amy Schumer, which he also wrote. It does feature many of the usual Apatowisms, like the heavily ad-lib dialogue, a funny supporting cast, including LeBron James as an exaggerated version of himself, and the over 2-hour runtime. However, it gets by thanks to Schumer's charm and the strong chemistry between her and Bill Hader as they navigate their relationship. There's also that sweetness and heartbreak underneath the surface that are common in his movies, and it's handled well here. He would do the same with Pete Davidson on The King of Staten Island, a very personal film for Davidson, with him inserting a lot of himself into the film, including his character losing his fireman father at a young age and his health problems. Like Schumer with Trainwreck, this was a good showcase for him and allowed the actor to highlight his dramatic acting skills and comedic abilities, as well as playing off the likes of Marissa Tomei and Bill Burr. Is this movie longer than Die Hard? You bet it is, but I was at least invested for a good amount of the runtime. And to Davidson's credit, he himself made fun of its length during an SNL sketch about the necessity of short movies. Judd Apatow's most recent narrative film is The Bubble, which was produced for Netflix and had a lot of comedic potential with its premise of actors filming a movie during the pandemic. It was a sillier and more outlandish film than his other work, which tried for the most part to exist in reality. So Apatow at least tried to make something a little different, but I did not care for it. The constant ad-libs felt meandering and were not all that funny, and played a role in stretching this basic concept to over 2 hours. Oh, and the TikTok dances. So many TikTok dances. There was a clever satire in here somewhere, but it got lost behind the superfluous scenes that added little. I know I've mentioned over and over again how long Apatow's movies are, but The Bubble really was ridiculously long for this kind of story, which maybe would have been better suited as a short sketch or something. Despite these issues and a few mishaps, I do like Judd Apatow's films overall. He does have a solid comedic voice, and the amount of talent he has nurtured over his career is remarkable. He has crafted multiple funny and heartwarming movies, and does overall have an understanding of how to give the audience endearing characters that take advantage of the actor's comic abilities. For a period of time, he did play a pivotal role in changing the comedy landscape with quite a number of worthwhile films coming out of his influence. See you next time.